Today we are going to be discussing sacrifices, and we're going to start with this first example right here. I'm going to kind of slowly fast forward to the move that led to this position here. As you can see, we were looking to set something up with a knight, moving the knight, but we waited too long, decided to take the free bishop there.
Queenside castling.
Unfortunately, it exposed our king. Okay, we got a knight in place there. And now they're doubling up on our knight. We move our knight out of the way, going for a fork. Unfortunately,
check.
That's not looking so good. We move our king out of the way. And black takes. Okay. Our position is kind of in trouble. We're playing as white. We decide to take one of the freer pieces, the knight right there. And we're hoping that black doesn't move its queen. Black decides to get really aggressive here, and this is a perfect opportunity for a sacrifice. If you'll notice, we have a bishop on c4. That can't really do anything, but it is eyeballing the queen. Okay? Now, of course, if we move the knight, let's say here, well, you know, the queen can move pretty much wherever it wants. So what do we do instead of that? Well, you got to find a way to check. Now, if we check here, queen can take. So, I mean, we could win the queen that way, but there's a better move because we're trading off rooks.
Check.
And that is simply to take the knight and sacrifice it by checking from b6, which is what we do.
Check.
Okay. Now, black can either capture or move its king. Those are the only two moves it has. In this case, black decides to capture there with the bishop, and we win the queen, and we are eventually able to win the game via checkmate. In this spot right here, black has just castled, and we are going to sacrifice our d3 bishop for 3 reasons. The first is to break down black's position defensively and give us a shot at the king. The second is to win the bishop. And of course, the third reason is to put pressure on the queen and the d5 pawn. Black actually plays it pretty good there. And we still go ahead. And we don't quite get the exchange we want. We have a discovered check in place. But we have to actually play this one out. But it helps a ton having black's defensive position weakened. So it's kind of an even game there. We've got that g1 rook protecting c1. We pull back for better defense there. There's a check. We sneak in. Now we get the check with the queen. And we get a little too creative in snatching this pawn. Black smartly puts the pen in place. We have to trade there, but that's okay. We got a plan here. We're going to finish this off. Moving the rooks back and forth. Okay, that doesn't work. We're going to try plan B. All right, black blocks. Now we can sneak the other rook in, winning the rook. And at this point, black decides to resign. One of the reasons I like to sacrifice is to improve position or to weaken an opponent's position so we can get a king hunt going. In this spot right here, okay, the logical thing would be, okay, we retake, and it goes something like this, right? Well, I decided to take a different line, and that is sacrificing the bishop, check. Okay, king's probably going to take. If it don't take, we've got a lot of options as well. King takes. Now we can take the pawn and put the king in check. But more importantly, that removes the defender for the knight. So we sacrificed, but we haven't given up any material net. And now black's king is in a bad position. It's basically blocking its rook. So while we may be close in material, we're technically ahead of material because our material is more developed, unless, we give the advantage back. So there's going to be a second sacrifice coming in this game. There was a check here in exchange. Decided to bring the knight out. Again, it's mate because black doesn't have any defenders unless this brings his queen to defend.
Kinside castling.
We go into castle. We decide to put the rook there. And at this point, we decide to pull the trigger and take with the knight. Okay. Going to sacrifice one more time, and that is with the rook. And now we can check with the queen. And at this point, black resigns. Had black stayed for another move, there's really only one piece it can move. That's the king. And that would be to f8. And we would finish it off
Checkmate.
With a mate right there. In this spot right here, we have a bishop on c6. The plan is to leave it hanging for black to take and set up a nice little checkmate. Okay, we get checked there, get in the corner, we get checked again. We're going to take the pawn with our king. Now black comes in to c4 as it's protected. Check. And black desperately wants to remove the pen by taking the unguarded bishop. Unfortunately for black, a3 is now guarded by the king. And that's it. In this spot right here, we're going to look at a knight sacrifice use or breakdown of position. But before we do that, we're going to look at how the position was arrived at. Hopefully not going too fast here. Going to back up the bishop. Okay. We put the knight in place. We're looking to take out the pawn on h2 and try to isolate the king. There we go. Another check. And white actually plays good defense. We couldn't slide the queen in right away because of the g3 pawn. Again, smart move. We win the knight there. Tricky spot. Okay, trading off. Probably should have taken g3 there. White makes really good defense in bringing out its queen. Now we take g3. Now we back it up. And that's it right there. In this example right here, the game is pretty even in terms of material, and black has a dark squared bishop, preventing our e-pawn from advancing to promotion. What do? Well, you sacrifice the rook in order to get to an endgame that is more favorable. So we take the rook and we take out the bishop. Black captures. Now we can push the pawn. Of course, black can get its rook in place.
Promotion to queen.
But once it captures, we get our bishop in place. Now we can take there. And we can also defend against the c-pawn coming through. And now it's just a matter of pushing up the g-pawn.
Promotion to queen.
At this point,
check.
Black is way down material
Check.
And decides to resign. Final sacrifice of the day here. Playing as black, we have a pawn lockup in the middle here. So I played on a set a number of times. The idea is to get the light squared bishop and the queen together. So we got the queen and the light squared bishop together there. A bunch of pieces. This one's tricky. White actually plays this good after the initial attack there. Going to bring in the pawn. We've got to clear out these knights somehow, which is a little bit tricky. Going to push the other pawn forward there. Okay, now we can trade knights. So now we've cleared up our position. If you'll notice right here, if white does not move its rook, it's game over. So white's smart. It moves its rook out of the way. So it has an extra move here. Now that does leave the bishop hanging, so we took it right there. Okay, now we check. Now we bring in our bishop. Now we take with our bishop. Okay, so we cleared out some space. This part is tricky as well. But again, that's why we did the sacrifice. It's about being able to finish here. Next move is going to be queen to h1 check. Okay, now we're going to bring in the rook for a check. Okay, and basically I think white has like 2 different squares to go to. It decides to go to e3, which is challenging because we can't really check them there. So we're going to put the queen in play here. Number of different ways white can block. White decides to bring in its bishop because it's kind of secure. However, the good news is because of the rook, we now have f2 open, which is where we go. All right, and it's mate in 1. If you said queen d4, you are correct.